The child in her arms should have been just another casualty. Another nameless victim caught in the crossfire of Dae-sung Kim's expanding territory. But when Neka-Ease stumbled into the rain-slicked alley, clutching her feverish son against her chest, something ancient and protective roared to life inside him. He'd ordered executions with less hesitation than what he felt now, staring at the terror flickering in her dark eyes. He's just a child. Her voice cut through the downpour, through the threats of his enforcers, through 15 years of calculated violence. Dae-sung's hand, raised to signal the end of this inconvenient interruption, froze mid-air. Neka's fingers trembled against her son's burning forehead, rain mixing with tears she refused to let fall. Please. He's just a child. Dae-sung stepped closer, and she instinctively pulled back. That small movement, that reflexive retreat even in her desperation, ignited something in him that had nothing to do with the empire he'd built through blood and ruthlessness. For the first time in 15 years of controlling this neon-lit corner of the city, Dae-sung Kim felt completely out of control. "Lower your weapons," he whispered, and the world shifted in that alley. If this story gripped you in the first 30 seconds, smash that like button, subscribe for more intense romance, drop a comment telling me what you think happens next, and share this with someone who loves powerful stories about unexpected love. Neka had walked past Dae-sung Kim's world for 8 months without truly seeing him. He was a presence in the neighborhood, expensive cars with tinted windows, men in dark suits who made shopkeepers nervous, the scent of bergamot and danger that lingered in doorways after his people left. She knew the important things. Stay invisible when his black sedans rolled through, keep her head down, never make eye contact, and protect her son from the violence that pulsed beneath the surface of their streets. Invisibility was Neka's specialty. 28 years of being overlooked, first in Lagos, then in this rain-soaked city, had taught her how to move through spaces without disturbing the air. She folded herself smaller on crowded buses, quieted her breathing around police officers, perfected the art of being present without being seen. A single mother, a Nigerian immigrant, a nurse working double shifts at an underfunded clinic, the world had given her plenty of practice at disappearing. Today, that careful invisibility shattered. Her son, Chisholm, had been burning with fever for 2 days. The clinic couldn't see him until next week. The emergency room meant bills she couldn't pay. So Neka had done what she always did. She'd prayed, given him lukewarm baths, and hoped her nursing training would be enough. But when he stopped responding to her voice, when his small body went limp in her arms, hope wasn't enough anymore. She'd run into the rain without thinking, without her umbrella, without knowing where she was going. Just away from their cramped apartment where her baby was slipping away from her. The alley had seemed empty, a shortcut to the main road where she could flag down a taxi, beg the driver to take them to the hospital, promise payment she didn't have. The alley wasn't empty. 3 men in dark suits turned as she stumbled to a halt, their expensive shoes splashing in puddles that reflected neon signs from the street beyond. Between them knelt a 4th man, bloodied and pleading in a language Neka didn't understand. Behind them all stood Dae-sung Kim. She'd seen his face before on the news, in whispered conversations at the clinic when gang violence sent another patient through their doors. Sharp jawline, dark eyes that missed nothing, black hair slicked back with casual perfection. Even in the rain, even in this moment of obvious violence, he looked devastating. Tailored black suit, the top buttons of his white shirt undone despite the cold, revealing the edge of a tattoo that disappeared beneath expensive fabric. "Turn around." His voice came in accented English, each word precisely chosen. "Walk away. Forget you saw this." Neka's arms tightened around Chisholm. She should have obeyed, should have run. But her son's skin was fire against her own, and the main road seemed impossibly far, and something in her nurse's training, in her mother's heart, in her stubborn Nigerian soul, refused to move. "Please," she heard herself say. "I need help. My son." I said walk away. Not a request. Dae-sung Kim didn't make requests. She raised her eyes and watched his expression shift from cold dismissal to something sharp and focused. He crossed the distance between them in 3 strides, expensive Italian shoes silent despite the rain. Close he was terrifying. Not just his reputation, not just the violence clearly interrupted, but the intensity in his gaze as it moved from her face to the small boy in her arms. What's wrong with him? His hand lifted toward Chisholm's forehead, then stopped, hovering, waiting for permission that Nneka didn't know how to give. Fever. He won't wake up. I need to get to the hospital, but I can't. Her voice cracked. I can't afford. Dae-sung's eyes narrowed. In all the stories she'd heard, no one had ever mentioned how quiet he could become, a stillness more dangerous than any threat. He's just a child, she whispered, and something ancient moved behind his controlled expression. How long has he been like this? 2 days. The fever won't break. I'm a nurse, I've tried everything, but... You're a nurse. He said it like he was filing away information, reorganizing his understanding of her. And you ran into this alley because... I wasn't thinking. I just needed help. Nneka's knees buckled, exhaustion and terror finally catching up. Dae-sung caught her before she fell, one arm steadying her while the other carefully, impossibly gently, touched Chisholm's burning forehead. She flinched at the contact, at the proximity to this dangerous man, and watched something flicker across his face. Surprise, maybe. Recognition. You're terrified, he said quietly, but you still came to me. I didn't know you were here. I swear I was just trying to get to the street. You're lying. Softer this time but no less absolute. You knew exactly whose territory this is. Nneka met his eyes, saw genuine concern there mixed with something that looked like barely restrained violence, not directed at her but at the situation, at her son's suffering, at whatever had driven her to this desperate moment. What's your name? Nneka. Nneka Ease. The way he said it, careful like something precious, stopped her breath. Nneka. He turned to his men, rapid Korean she couldn't understand, then back to her in English. My car is at the end of the alley. We're taking him to my doctor. I can't afford. Did I ask about money? He was already moving, guiding her toward the sleek black sedan she could now see waiting beyond the alley's entrance. I've built my life on reading people, on knowing who's dangerous and who isn't. You walked into an execution to save your son. That's not stupidity. That's courage I rarely see in armed men. She stumbled and his grip tightened, steadying her again. This close, she could smell bergamot and something darker. Rain maybe. Or the metallic scent of whatever violence she'd interrupted. Why are you helping us? Dae-sung was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on Chisholm's small face. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight she didn't understand. Because 15 years ago, I watched my younger brother die from a fever our mother couldn't afford to treat. He pulled open the car door, rain soaking through his expensive suit. Get in. Your invisibility ends tonight. Nneka slid into leather seats that probably cost more than her annual rent, still clutching Chisholm, still trying to understand how a desperate run through the rain had led her into the car of the city's most feared crime lord. Dae-sung settled beside her, already on his phone, barking orders in Korean while his driver pulled smoothly into traffic. He glanced at her, and for just a moment the deadly calm cracked. He's just a child, he repeated her words, something raw in his voice. Yes, and no one touches children in my city. Not fever. Not poverty. Not anyone. As neon lights streaked past the windows and Chisholm's labored breathing filled the silence between orders, Nneka realized she'd made a choice she couldn't take back. She'd spoken one sentence that stopped the execution. Now she was sitting in Dae-sung Kim's kingdom, and invisibility, her greatest protection, was gone forever. She just didn't know yet that he'd been watching her quiet strength for months, counting the hours between glimpses of her determined walk to the clinic, or that this rain-soaked night would transform his violent empire into something he'd never imagined it could be. A shield for the only real thing he'd felt in 15 years. The kneeling man was still pleading when Dae-sung returned to the alley 20 minutes later. His enforcers stood exactly where he'd left them, weapons lowered but ready, confusion written across their disciplined faces. They'd never been dismissed mid-execution before. In 15 years, Dae-sung had never stopped once he'd made a decision. Until tonight. "Get him out of here," Dae-sung said in Korean, his voice carrying none of its usual edge. "Take him to the eastern port. Put him on a container ship back to Busan. Tell him if he ever returns, I'll remember this mercy lasted exactly as long as it took me to get a sick child to a doctor." His second-in-command, Jin-ho, stepped forward. "Boss, he stole from. I know what he did." Dae-sung's hand moved to his collar, adjusting the tie that was already ruined by rain. "I also know what I'm doing. Clear this alley. Erase the cameras. This night didn't happen." The man on the ground looked up, blood mixing with rain on his face, disbelief and desperate gratitude warring in his expression. He started to speak to thank this impossible reprieve, but Dae-sung had already turned away. Jin-ho followed him to the sedan, lowering his voice. "The others will talk. They'll say you're going soft. Let them." Dae-sung slid into the passenger seat, watching through the rain-streaked window as his men hauled the trembling thief to his feet. "I've spent 15 years proving I'm not soft. One act of mercy won't erase that reputation." It wasn't mercy for him. Jin-ho's observation was careful, testing. It was for the woman. Dae-sung didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because Jin-ho was right, and that terrified him more than any rival gang, any police investigation, any threat to his carefully constructed empire. He'd looked into Neka-Isa's dark eyes and seen a fear so raw, so desperate, that it had reached into his chest and stopped his heart. Not fear of him, though that was there too. Fear for her child. The kind of fear that made people reckless, that made a nurse run into an alley where men died for stealing. He'd seen that fear before. 23 years ago in Seoul, in his mother's eyes as she'd held his younger brother's burning body and begged neighbors for help that never came. He'd been 12 years old, helpless, watching Taehyun slip away because poverty was a slower execution than any bullet. "Find out everything about her," Dae-sung said quietly. "Where she works, where she lives, who threatens her. I want to know why a nurse who can barely afford rent is raising a son alone in the worst part of the city. And then I make sure she never has to run through the rain like that again." Jin-ho was silent for a moment. "Boss, getting involved with civilians. She saw my face. She saw an execution." Dae-sung's voice hardened, slipping back into the cold authority his men expected. "That makes her my concern. That makes her my responsibility. Tell me you understand." "I understand." But as the sedan pulled away from the alley, as the rain continued to fall on a night that would be erased from every camera, every witness, every record, Dae-sung knew Jin-ho didn't understand at all. None of them would. Because none of them had seen what he'd seen in that moment when Neka clutched her son and whispered those 4 words that shattered everything. "He's just a child." Not a plea for mercy. Statement of fact. A moral absolute that cut through every justification he'd built for the violence of his world. She hadn't begged. Hadn't tried to manipulate or negotiate. She'd simply spoken a truth so fundamental that it had stopped him cold. His phone buzzed. A text from his private doctor. "Fever breaking. Bacterial infection caught in time. The boy will be fine." Dae-sung closed his eyes, exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. In his world he controlled everything: territory, money, fear, respect. But for the last 20 minutes, sitting in that hospital waiting room watching Neka refuse to let go of her son's hand even as doctors worked, he'd controlled nothing. Not his racing pulse. Not the unfamiliar tightness in his throat. Not the violent urge to find whoever had put that exhausted desperation in her eyes and make them pay. The rain drummed against the car's roof. Somewhere behind them, a thief was being given a second chance he didn't deserve. Somewhere ahead, in a sterile hospital room his money had secured, a nurse was learning that invisibility was a privilege she'd just lost. And Dae-sung Kim, who'd built an empire on knowing exactly what he wanted and taking it without hesitation, realized he wanted something he couldn't take. Something he'd have to earn from a woman who had every reason to run from him. He wanted her to stop being afraid. Neka woke to sunlight she shouldn't be able to afford. The kind that poured through floor-to-ceiling windows, unfiltered by the grime and shadows of her usual world. For 3 confused seconds she thought she was dreaming. Then she smelled bergamot and something darker, the scent of expensive leather and a danger she recognized even before memory fully returned. She sat up too fast, her nurse's instinct screaming before her mind caught up. Chisholm. Where was Chisholm? He's sleeping. Dae-sung's voice came from across the room, calm and measured. In the bedroom next door. The fever broke at 4 this morning. My doctor says he needs rest and antibiotics. Both of which he'll get. Neka turned to find him standing by the windows, still wearing last night's rain-soaked suit, though he'd removed the jacket. His white shirt was wrinkled, the sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms marked with ink she couldn't quite make out from this distance. He looked exhausted. He looked devastating. I need to see him. She stood, realized she was wearing clothes that weren't hers, soft cotton pants and a shirt that hung loose on her frame. Her wet nurse's uniform was gone. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen. She changed you while you were sleeping. He said it simply, anticipating the question, the concern. Your son is through that door. I'll wait here. Neka moved past him, careful not to get too close, and pushed through the indicated door. Chisholm lay in a bed bigger than their entire sleeping area at home. His small body nearly swallowed by white sheets that probably cost more than her monthly rent. And 4 drip fed into his tiny arm. His breathing was steady, peaceful. The flush of fever was gone from his brown skin. She pressed her hand to his forehead. Oh, normal. Life. The sob came without permission, relief crashing through her with physical force. She'd been so sure, running through that rain, that she was losing him. That poverty would take her baby the way it took everything else she tried to hold on to. The antibiotic is pharmaceutical grade. Dae-sung had appeared in the doorway, keeping his distance but watching her with that same unsettling intensity from the alley. The infection was aggressive, but we caught it. He'll be weak for a few days. He needs to stay here. I can't stay here. Neka straightened, wiping her face. I have work. Have rent due. I need to. You collapsed in my car after we left the hospital. You haven't slept in 3 days. His tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind. Your supervisor at the clinic called your phone. I told her you had a family emergency. You're covered for the week. You answered my phone. The violation should have made her angry, but exhaustion dulled the edge of it. You were unconscious. Your son was being admitted. Someone had to make decisions. He moved into the room, still maintaining careful distance, and she realized he was doing it deliberately, giving her space, trying not to scare her. Mrs. Chen made breakfast. You should eat. I can't afford any of this. The words came out sharper than intended. Whatever this costs, the doctor, the medication, this place, I can't pay you back. Something flickered across his face. Not anger. Something that looked almost like pain. Did I ask you to? Then what do you want? Neka met his eyes, forcing herself not to look away despite every instinct screaming that you didn't challenge men like Dae-sung Kim. Nobody gives something for nothing. Especially not in your world. He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw tight, his hands flexing at his sides like he was physically restraining himself from moving closer. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer than she'd heard it. I want you to eat breakfast. I want your son to get well. I want you to stop looking at me like I'm going to hurt you. He paused, and the weight of 15 years of violence hung in the space between them. That's all I want today. Tomorrow we'll see. The city sprawled beneath them through those impossible windows, glittering in morning light that felt like another world. Neka's cramped apartment was somewhere down there, in the shadows where people like her survived. But up here, in this penthouse that smelled of bergamot and promises she didn't understand, her invisibility had shattered completely. Dae-sung turned to leave, giving her privacy with her son, but paused at the door. You walked into an execution to save him. You're braver than most men I employ. Don't insult us both by pretending you're helpless now. Then he was gone, leaving Neka standing in a stranger's sanctuary, wearing borrowed clothes, watching her son sleep in safety she'd never been able to provide. And for the first time since arriving in this rain-soaked city 8 months ago, she let herself wonder what it would feel like to stop running, to stop being invisible, to accept help from the most dangerous man she'd ever met. The thought terrified her almost as much as losing Chisholm had. Neka found Dae-sung on the terrace, the city spread before him like a chessboard he'd already won. He'd changed into fresh clothes, black slacks and a crisp white shirt, his hair still damp from a shower. He didn't turn when she stepped outside, but his shoulders shifted slightly, acknowledging her presence. Chisholm is still sleeping, she said, unsure why she felt compelled to report to him. The 4 seems to be working. My doctor will check on him this afternoon. He took a sip from a glass of whiskey despite the early hour. You should eat something. Mrs. Chen made enough to feed an army. I'm not hungry. Lie. Her stomach had been growling since she woke, but accepting food felt like accepting everything else. The debt, the obligation, the invisible chain she could feel tightening around her careful independence. I wanted to thank you. For last night. For saving him. Don't thank me yet. His voice carried an edge she hadn't heard before, something cold and final. We need to discuss why a nurse working double shifts can't afford basic medical care for her child. Neka's spine stiffened. That's not your concern. It became my concern the moment you stumbled into my alley. He finally turned to face her, and the intensity in his dark eyes made her breath catch. I've had people watching your building since dawn. Your landlord is a man named Marcus Webb. He's been harassing you for 3 months, demanding favors you won't give in exchange for rent extensions you desperately need. Heat flooded her face, shame and anger warring for dominance. You had no right. I had every right. He set the glass down with controlled precision. You saw my face. You witnessed an execution. That makes you a liability I need to understand. What I found was a woman being extorted by a predator who thinks poverty makes her available. I can handle Marcus. Even as she said it, she knew how hollow it sounded. You shouldn't have to. Dae-sung moved closer, and she forced herself not to retreat. As of this morning, Marcus Webb no longer owns your building. He's accepted a very generous offer to sell and relocate to a different state. The new owner has reviewed all tenant files and determined that several residents, including you, have been overcharged for substandard housing. Expect a refund and significantly reduced rent going forward. Neka stared at him, processing the casual way he'd just dismantled a threat she'd been losing sleep over for months. You bought my building. I bought several buildings in that neighborhood. Yours happened to be one of them. His expression gave nothing away. Consider it an investment in property development. You're lying. She stepped closer, anger finally overriding fear. You did this because of me. Because of last night. Yes. No hesitation. No attempt to soften it. I did this because men like Marcus Webb exist in shadows I allow. That ends now. For you. For any woman he's been terrorizing. I didn't ask you to. You didn't have to. His hand lifted, then stopped, that same hovering gesture from the alley, waiting for permission he still didn't have. Neka, I've built my empire on understanding threats. The man kneeling in that alley last night stole from me. Marcus Webb was stealing from you. The difference is, you couldn't make him stop. So you did it for me. Her voice shook. And what does that make me? What do I owe you now? Something raw flashed across his face, quickly controlled. You owe me nothing. This isn't a transaction. Everything is a transaction in your world. Then consider it payment for the lesson you taught me. He finally closed the distance between them, stopping close enough that she could smell bergamot and whiskey, could see the exhaustion in the lines around his eyes. You spoke 4 words that stopped an execution. You reminded me that some things are absolute. Children are absolute. And women raising children alone in buildings owned by predators shouldn't have to run through the rain begging for mercy they've already earned just by surviving. Neka's eyes burned. She wanted to argue, to refuse his dangerous generosity, to maintain the independence that had kept her alive this long. But Chisholm was sleeping safely in the next room. His fever broken by medicine she couldn't have afforded. Marcus would never corner her in the stairwell again, never suggest what he might accept instead of rent. I don't know how to accept this, she whispered. Then don't accept it. Just stop fighting it. Daesung's voice gentled, became almost tender. Whoever threatens you or your son will forget you exist. Not because you're invisible anymore, but because forgetting is safer than remembering. That's what I do, Neka. I make threats disappear. She looked up at him, at this man who'd turned his violence into a shield for her, and realized the most terrifying thing wasn't his power. It was how desperately she wanted to believe him. How easy it would be to stop carrying everything alone. What happens when you get tired of protecting us? The question came out smaller than she intended. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, something ancient and fierce burned in his eyes. Ask me that again in 15 years. Then maybe I'll have an answer that isn't terrifying for both of us. Dinner arrived at 7, carried in by Mrs. Chan on trays that gleamed like jewelry. Neka had expected something elaborate, the kind of meal rich people ate in movies, all tiny portions and unpronounceable names. Instead, the terrace table held steaming bowls of jjigae, perfectly grilled galbi, rice that smelled like home even though it wasn't her home, and a smaller plate of jollof rice that made her throat tight. You asked Mrs. Chen to make Nigerian food. It wasn't a question. Daesung sat across from her. His sleeves rolled up, looking less like a crime lord and more like a man who'd simply invited someone to dinner. I asked her to make food that might remind you that not everything here is foreign. She's been cooking Korean food for me for 10 years. She was excited to try something new. Neka touched the edge of the jollof rice plate, the familiar scent of tomatoes and pepper releasing something painful in her chest. My mother used to make this every Sunday. Before I left Lagos. Why did you leave? He served her soup without asking, the gesture so casual it took her a moment to realize how intimate it was. The same reason everyone leaves. I wanted more for Chisholm than I had. My nursing degree meant nothing there without connections, without money to bribe the right people. She took a careful sip of the jjigae, the heat and depth of flavor surprising her. This is good. My mother's recipe. One of the few things I remember clearly from Seoul. He ate slowly, precisely, but his eyes never left her face. I was 12 when we moved here. She worked 3 jobs trying to keep me and my brother fed. It wasn't enough. Your brother. Neka remembered his words from the car, the crack in his deadly calm. In the alley, you said. Taehyun died when he was 7. Bacterial infection, same as your son. We couldn't afford the antibiotics. His voice was steady, controlled, but his knuckles whitened around his chopsticks. My mother held him for 3 days, watching him burn up from the inside. When he finally stopped breathing, something in her broke. She lasted another year before her heart gave out. The doctors said it was congenital. I knew better. Neka set down her spoon, the food suddenly tasteless. I'm sorry. Don't be. It taught me the most important lesson I've ever learned. He met her eyes, and the pain there was raw, unguarded. Poverty isn't passive. It's violence in slow motion. It kills just as surely as any bullet, just quieter, more acceptable. So you built an empire. She understood now, the cold efficiency, the absolute control. To make sure you'd never be helpless again. To make sure no one could take from me what poverty took from my family. He paused, then added quietly, Until 3 nights ago, I thought that was enough. That empire was purpose enough. The weight of his words settled between them, heavy with implication. Neka reached for the jollof rice, needing something familiar to anchor her. What changed? I watched a woman risk everything for her child, run into an execution because love mattered more than survival. His voice dropped, became almost tender. You reminded me what I was actually fighting for. Not just power. Protection. The ability to keep people safe. That's a lot of weight to put on 4 words. She tried to keep her tone light, but her hand trembled slightly. You have no idea how heavy 4 words can be when they're the right ones. He leaned back, studying her with that unsettling intensity. Tell me what you want, Neka. Not what you need, not what you're running from. What do you actually want for your life? The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years. Want was a luxury she'd stopped allowing herself. I want Chisholm to grow up without being afraid. I want him to go to good schools, to have choices I never had. I want. She hesitated, the dream feeling foolish spoken aloud to a man who owned half the city. I want a small house with a garden. Nothing fancy. Just space for him to play. Sunlight in the morning. Silence at night. That's all. He sounded almost disappointed. That's everything. She met his eyes, defiant. I don't need penthouses or expensive cars or power. I need peace. 50. A life where I'm not constantly calculating which bill to pay late, which meal to skip so Chisholm can eat. That's my dream. It's small, but it's mine. Dae-sung was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he stood, moved to the terrace railing, and looked out at the city below. When he spoke, his voice carried across the space between them like a promise. I spent 15 years building an empire because I was taught to speak the language of power, money, fear, control. He turned back to her, and something in his eyes made her breath catch. You speak a different language. One I'd forgotten existed. And I think, Neka ease, that I want to learn it again. The jollof rice had gone cold on her plate, but she didn't care. Because somewhere between Seoul and this penthouse, between his brother's death and her son's survival, they'd started speaking the same language after all. Just sounded like hope instead of violence. Neka stayed for 3 days. Not because Dae-sung asked, though his silent presence suggested he wanted her to. Not because Chisholm needed more medical care, though the doctor visited twice daily. She stayed because leaving felt like stepping back into a life that no longer fit, like trying to wear shoes she'd outgrown without noticing. On the 3rd night, she found Dae-sung in his office, surrounded by monitors showing security feeds from across the city. He glanced up when she entered, and something in his expression softened in a way she was beginning to recognize. Relief maybe. Or something more dangerous. Can't sleep. He closed the laptop in front of him, giving her his full attention. Chisholm is sleeping peacefully. I'm not used to having nothing to worry about. She moved to the window, watching the city lights blur in the distance. It's unsettling. You could get used to it. His voice came from closer than expected. He'd moved to stand beside her, careful to maintain that respectful distance he always kept. The guest room is yours as long as you need it. I can't stay here forever. Even as she said it, part of her wondered why not. What was waiting for her in that cramped apartment besides memories of struggle and fear? Why not? He asked the question she'd been avoiding. Give me one good reason. Because this isn't real. She turned to face him, and the intensity in his eyes made her pulse quicken. This penthouse, the protection, the dinners where you look at me like I matter. None of this is my life. It's borrowed. Temporary. What if it wasn't? He stepped closer, and this time she didn't retreat. What if I told you I've been watching you for 8 months? Counting the hours between when you walk past my building on your way to the clinic. Noticing how you always stop to help the homeless woman on the corner, even when you're running late. Seeing the way you carry yourself, Like you're apologizing for taking up space in a world that should be making room for you. Neka's breath caught. You've been watching me. Not the way you think. Not surveillance or obsession. His hand lifted, and this time when it hovered near her face, she didn't flinch. The way you notice something rare. Something you're afraid to want because wanting means risking loss. That sounds like obsession to me. But her voice was barely a whisper. Maybe it is. His fingers finally made contact, the gentlest touch against her cheek, and she felt the tremor in his hand. I've spent 15 years surrounded by people who want something from me. Power, money, protection, fear. You're the first person in all that time who looked at me and saw a man who could save her son, not a boss who could advance her position. The first person who spoke to me like I was human. You are human. She said it simply like it was obvious, and watched something crack in his carefully controlled expression. Not in my world. In my world I'm a symbol. Reputation. A calculation people make about risk versus reward. He cupped her face now, both hands gentle despite the violence they'd committed. But when you said, he's just a child, you weren't talking to Dae-sung Kim, the man who runs this city's underworld. You were talking to someone you thought might have enough humanity left to listen. And God help me, Neka, I did. I was desperate. But she didn't pull away from his touch. You were honest. And I haven't heard honesty in so long I'd forgotten what it sounded like. His thumb brushed across her cheekbone, a reverent gesture that made her chest tight. You're the only real thing I've encountered in 15 years. The only person who doesn't perform for me, doesn't calculate angles, doesn't want anything except for her son to be safe and healthy. Do you understand how rare that is? How terrifying. Terrifying. She searched his face, saw genuine fear there beneath the confession. Because now that I've seen what real looks like, everything else feels like shadows. My empire, my reputation, the respect I've killed to maintain. It all feels hollow compared to 3 days of watching you read bedtime stories to your son in my guest room. His voice dropped, became raw. You've ruined me, Neka Ease. Completely ruined me for the life I built. She should have been afraid. Should have recognized the danger in his words, in the possessive way he looked at her, in the confession that sounded like both worship and warning. Instead, she lifted her hand to cover his, holding his palm against her face. I'm not trying to ruin anything. I'm just trying to survive. I know. He leaned his forehead against hers, and the intimacy of it stole her breath. That's what makes it real. You're not trying to be anything except exactly who you are. And who you are is the first thing I've wanted to protect more than my empire. The first person I've wanted to know, not just use. The only thing that's felt true since I was 12 years old watching my brother die. The city sprawled below them, his kingdom of shadows and violence. But up here in this moment none of it mattered. Only his hands on her face, his confession hanging in the air between them, and the terrifying realization that she wanted to stay. Not just in his penthouse. In this space where he looked at her like she was rare, real, worth ruining an empire for. The phone call came during breakfast on the 4th morning. Neka was watching Chisholm eat rice porridge, his appetite finally returning, when Dae-sung's phone buzzed against the glass table. He glanced at the screen, and something cold slipped across his features before the mask returned. Excuse me. He stood, already answering in Korean as he moved to the terrace. Neka tried not to listen, tried to focus on wiping Chisholm's mouth, but Dae-sung's voice carried through the open door. Dark. Controlled. Lethal. The tone he'd used in the alley before her world had shifted. She caught fragments, English words scattered through the Korean. Name. Clinic. Complaint. When he returned 5 minutes later, his expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes held that predatory focus she'd seen the first night. The look of a man who'd just made a decision that would change someone's life irrevocably. What was that about? She kept her voice steady despite the unease curling in her stomach. Nothing you need to worry about. He sat, picked up his coffee, took a sip like the call had been routine. Chisholm looks better today. Dae-sung. She waited until he met her eyes. Don't lie to me. I heard my name. He set the cup down with precision, then leaned back, studying her with that unsettling intensity. Your clinic supervisor, Dr. Patricia Okonkwo. She filed a complaint with the medical board 3 days ago. Claims you've been stealing medications, specifically antibiotics. Strange timing, isn't it? Right after you took emergency leave. Ice flooded Neka's veins. That's not true. I've never. I know it's not true. She's been skimming medications for months and selling them. When I called your phone about your family emergency, she realized you might have witnessed something. Or maybe she's just petty enough to punish you for taking time off. Either way, she made you a target. What did you do? The question came out sharper than intended. I made a phone call. His tone was matter-of-fact, almost casual. Dr. Okonkwo has withdrawn her complaint. She's actually decided to resign from the clinic entirely. Effective immediately. She feels it's time to pursue opportunities elsewhere. Possibly in another state. Neka's hands clenched in her lap. You threatened her. I informed her of facts she'd overlooked. The security footage showing her removing inventory. The financial records proving she's been supplementing her income through pharmaceutical theft. The witnesses who've been too afraid to speak until now. He paused, and his voice dropped to something darker. And yes, I made it clear that filing false reports against people under my protection has consequences. Under your protection. Neka stood abruptly, the chair scraping against marble. Is that what I am now? Property you've claimed. You're someone who was about to lose everything because a corrupt supervisor decided to make you her scapegoat. Dae-sung remained seated, but tension coiled through his frame. I stopped it. I thought you'd be relieved. I'm terrified. The words burst out louder than she'd intended. Chisholm looked up, concerned, and she forced her voice softer. You made a person disappear with one phone call. Just erased her career, her life because she threatened me. Do you understand how much power that is? How dangerous? Yes. No apology in his tone. I understand exactly how dangerous I am. You knew that the night you walked into my alley. This isn't new information, Neka. Knowing it and seeing it are different things. She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the morning sunlight. Last night you told me I was real, that I made you want to be human again. But this is the man who orders executions. The man everyone fears. Yes. He stood now but didn't approach. I'm both men. I'm the one who held your son in the rain, and I'm the one who makes threats vanish. You don't get one without the other. Maybe I don't want either. The lie tasted bitter, but she needed space, needed to breathe without the weight of his protection suffocating her choices. Something flickered in his eyes, raw and painful. Then leave. I won't stop you. The guest room is paid through the month. Your building is safe. Dr. Okonkwo won't touch you. You can go back to your life with your son healthy and your job secure. Walk away and I'll let you. Just like that. She searched his face for the manipulation, the angle, but found only resignation. Just like that. His hands flexed at his sides, the only sign of tension. But understand this, Neka. Whether you're here or in that apartment, whether you accept my protection or reject it, I will still make sure nothing touches you. I will still erase threats before they reach you. 'Cause you were right that first day. This isn't about what you owe me. It's about what I owe you for reminding me that some things are absolute. That children matter. That people who heal deserve protection from people who destroy. That sounds like a prison. Her voice cracked. It's the only way I know how to care. He finally crossed the distance between them, stopping close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes, the fear he was trying to hide. I'm not good at the language you speak. Simple dreams. Gentle protection. I only know how to protect through power. Through making enemies disappear. If that terrifies you, then yes, you should leave. Because I won't stop. I can't. The honesty in his confession hurt more than any threat. 'Cause he was right. She'd known what he was from the beginning. She just let 3 days of softness make her forget the violence underneath. Neka packed that afternoon while Dae-sung was in a meeting. Mrs. Chen helped silently, folding clothes Neka hadn't arrived with, packing medications the doctor had prescribed, adding containers of food that would last a week. The older woman's eyes were sad but understanding, and she pressed a piece of paper into Neka's hand before she left. His private number. In case the boy needs anything. In case you need anything. The apartment felt smaller than Neka remembered. 4 days away had somehow shrunk the already cramped space into something claustrophobic. The ceiling pressed down, the walls closed in, and the single window that faced a brick wall seemed to mock the floor-to-ceiling views she'd gotten used to without meaning to. Chisholm noticed immediately. "Where's Mr. Kim?" "We're home now, baby. This is where we live." She forced brightness into her voice while unpacking their things. "But his home was nicer. And he made you smile." Her son's observation was too perceptive for a 6-year-old who'd just recovered from near death. "Don't you like him?" "It's complicated." The adult answer that meant nothing to a child. "He told me he'd teach me Korean when I got better. He said I was brave like a warrior." Chisholm touched the 4 mark on his arm, already fading. "Is he coming to visit?" "I don't know." The truth settled heavy in her chest. "Get ready for bed. We have to go back to our normal routine tomorrow." Normal felt like a punishment. That night, Neka lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds she'd learned to ignore over 8 months. The couple fighting upstairs. The bass from someone's music thrumming through thin walls. The sirens that seemed closer now, more threatening without the buffer of 20 floors and bulletproof glass between her and the street. She'd wanted this. Independence. Her own space. Freedom from the suffocating weight of Dae-sung's protection. So why did it feel like she'd amputated part of herself? Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from an unknown number, though she knew immediately who it was. "The door locks have been replaced. Keys are in your mailbox. Security cameras installed in the hallway. You won't see my men, but they're there. Sleep safely." She should have been angry. Should have felt violated by his continued intervention. Instead, tears burned her eyes because he was still protecting her even after she'd called his care a prison. Even after she'd chosen this hollow apartment over his sanctuary. 3 days passed like decades. Neka went back to work at the clinic, now under new management that actually paid on time and maintained proper inventory. She picked Chisholm up from the neighbor who watched him, made dinner in her cramped kitchen, read bedtime stories in a room that felt emptier than before. Everything was exactly as it had been before that rain-soaked night. Except Neka felt like she was moving through water, every action requiring effort she didn't have. The invisibility she'd once perfected now felt like erasure. She folded herself smaller on the bus and realized she missed taking up space in rooms where someone actually wanted to see her. She missed his heavy, searching gaze. The way he looked at her like she mattered. Like she was rare. The bergamot scent that lingered after he left a room. The careful distance he maintained until she gave permission to get closer. The absolute certainty in his voice when he promised nothing would hurt her. On the 4th night, Chisholm asked again. "Can we call Mr. Kim? I want to show him my drawing from school." Neka looked at the piece of paper Mrs. Chan had pressed into her hand, now worn from being carried in her pocket. His private number. A lifeline she'd been too proud to use. "Why do you like him so much?" she asked her son, needing to understand. "Because he looks at us like we're important." Chisholm said it simply, the way children stated obvious truths adults complicated. "And because he makes you not scared anymore. You were always scared before, Mama. Even when you pretended you weren't." The observation hit like a physical blow. She'd thought she'd hidden it well, the constant fear that had become so familiar she'd stopped noticing its weight. But her 6-year-old had seen it. Had watched it disappear in those 4 days at the penthouse. Had recognized what she'd been too stubborn to admit. She wasn't just hollow without Dae-sung. She was afraid again. Afraid of the shadows in the stairwell where Marcus used to corner her. Afraid of every fever, every bill, every unknown threat her hypervigilance couldn't prevent. She'd traded his terrifying protection for her old familiar terror, and called it freedom. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from that same number. I'm not good at this. Giving space. At pretending I don't count the hours since you left. But you asked me to let you choose, so I'm choosing to respect your choice. Even though it's killing me. Even though I see you everywhere in this empty penthouse. You were right. You made everything else feel like shadows. I just wish you'd stayed long enough to see that you were never my prisoner. You were my light. Neka read the message 3 times, her hands shaking. Then she looked at her son, at this cramped apartment that used to mean safety and now just meant alone. At the life she'd fought so hard to build that suddenly felt like she was fighting the wrong battle. Get your jacket, she told Chisholm. We're going to visit Mr. Kim. Really? His face lit up with joy she hadn't seen since before the fever. Really? Because maybe freedom wasn't about choosing independence over protection. Maybe it was about choosing who you wanted to be brave enough to let in. And she was tired of being strong alone in the dark when someone was offering to be strong with her in the light. Even if that light came wrapped in violence and power and the heavy searching gaze of a man who'd made her feel seen for the first time in her life. Neka was halfway to the door when someone knocked. 3 precise raps that made her heart stop because she knew, without seeing, who stood on the other side. It was past midnight. Chisholm was already asleep in fresh pajamas. His jacket laid out for a trip they apparently wouldn't need to make. He opened the door. Dae-sung stood in the dim hallway, and he looked nothing like the controlled crime lord who'd made Dr. Okonkwo disappear with a phone call. His hair was disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it. His shirt was wrinkled, untucked. No jacket despite the cold. And his eyes, those dark eyes that usually missed nothing, looked raw and desperate. I couldn't stay away. The words came out rough, like he'd been holding them back for days and they'd finally broken through. I tried. Gave you space. I respected your choice. But it's 2 a.m. and I'm standing outside your apartment like a fool because I'd rather be vulnerable with you than safe alone in that empty penthouse. Neka's throat tightened. We were just coming to see you. He blinked, processing. What? Chisholm wanted to show you his drawing. And I. She stepped back, letting him see into the apartment she'd chosen over his sanctuary. The cramped space. The thin walls. The life that had felt like freedom 4 days ago and felt like prison now. I realized I was wrong. About a lot of things. You weren't wrong. He stayed in the doorway, not presuming entry, still giving her the choice. I am terrifying. I do solve problems through violence. Everything you said was true. But so was everything you said. She moved closer, close enough to smell the bergamot that had become familiar, comforting. You're both men. And I walked away because I was afraid of the dangerous one. But I forgot about the man who held my son in the rain. Who learned my mother's jollof rice recipe. Who looked at me like I was the only real thing in his world. You are. His voice cracked. These 4 days have been the longest of my life. I've sat in meetings where millions were at stake and all I could think about was whether you were eating enough. Whether Chisholm missed the penthouse. Whether you were scared again without me there to make the shadows disappear. I was scared, she admitted. Not of threats or bills or anything I could name. I was scared because my apartment felt empty without your heavy, searching gaze. Because being independent felt like being erased again. Because I realized that maybe strength isn't about carrying everything alone. Maybe it's about trusting someone enough to help carry it. Dae-sung's hands trembled at his sides, and she realized he was physically restraining himself from reaching for her. I don't know how to do this. I've spent 15 years building walls, controlling everything, making sure I never needed anyone. And then you spoke 4 words in a rain-soaked alley, and every wall I'd built came crashing down. He's just a child, she whispered, remembering. He's just a child, he repeated, and stepped into her apartment, finally crossing that threshold. And you're just a woman trying to protect him. And I'm just a man who's so goddamn tired of being alone with his empire. I'd rather have this. He gestured to her cramped apartment, to the life she'd been ashamed of. This small space with you and Chisholm than that entire penthouse without you. I'd rather be vulnerable and terrified and completely out of control if it means I get to be those things with you. Nneka reached for his hand, felt him grip hers like she was the only thing keeping him grounded. I don't need your empire. I just need to know that when you make threats disappear, it's not because I'm property you're protecting. It's because you care. I care. He pulled her closer, his other hand cupping her face with that same reverent gentleness. I care so much it's destroying me. I care enough to let you walk away. Enough to protect you even when you hate me for it. Enough to stand in this hallway at 2 in the morning admitting that you've completely undone 15 years of carefully constructed control. Good. She leaned into his touch, felt something settle in her chest that had been restless since she'd left. Because you've undone 8 months of my carefully constructed invisibility. Seems fair that we're both ruined. His laugh was soft, disbelieving. So what now? Now you come inside. Meet Chisholm's new drawing. Have tea in my cramped kitchen. And we figure out how to build something between your world and mine. Something that's neither empire nor poverty. Just us. Just us, he echoed, and the hope in his voice made her chest ache. I can work with that. He stepped fully inside, and Nneka closed the door on the hallway, on the life she'd been trying to return to, on the impossible choice between independence and connection. Because the truth was, she didn't have to choose. She just had to be brave enough to let him be vulnerable with her, to let him carry some of her fear while she learned to navigate his violence. It wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't be simple. But as Dae-sung folded himself into her tiny kitchen, looking completely out of place and perfectly content, she realized that maybe the best things never were. Morning came soft through the single window, and Nneka woke to find Dae-sung asleep in the chair beside her bed, his hand still holding hers. He'd insisted on staying after their tea had turned into hours of quiet conversation, after she'd shown him Chisholm's drawing, after they'd navigated the strange intimacy of existing in the same small space without the buffer of his penthouse's vast rooms. He looked younger in sleep, the hard edges of his face softened, the deadly calm replaced with something almost peaceful. She studied the tattoo visible at his collar, Korean characters she'd asked about last night. Family. Protection. The two things he'd built his empire around. The two things he'd found again in a rain-soaked alley. You're staring. His eyes opened, immediately alert despite just waking. I can feel it. I'm memorizing. She squeezed his hand, felt him squeeze back. In case this is a dream and I wake up alone again. Not a dream. Not leaving. He sat up, rolled his shoulders and grimaced. Though your chair is significantly less comfortable than my penthouse furniture, we should discuss living arrangements. Mama. Chisholm's voice came from the doorway, sleep-soft and confused. Mr. Kim is here. Dae-sung turned, and something in his expression shifted, became gentle in a way Nneka had never seen. Good morning, warrior. I heard you have a drawing to show me. Chisholm ran to his room and returned with a crayon masterpiece, all bold lines and bright colors. A stick figure family, a woman, a small boy, and a tall man with dark hair. Above them a house with a garden. Below the words, my family, in uneven letters. Dae-sung took the paper with careful hands, studying it like it was the most important document he'd ever reviewed. When he looked up, his eyes were bright with something that looked dangerously close to tears. This is beautiful. His voice was rough. Can I keep it? Only if you promise to stay. Chisholm said it matter-of-factly, the way children negotiated the terms of their world. Mama's been sad since we left your house. And you look sad too. So you should just stay with us. Nneka started to intervene, to explain that adult relationships were complicated. But Dae-sung spoke first. Come here. He knelt down to Chisholm's level, and Nneka watched her son approach without fear, without hesitation. I need to make you a promise, And I need you to understand how serious it is. Can you do that? Chisholm nodded, his small face solemn. I'm not leaving. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Your mama and I are still figuring out what that looks like, but the leaving part is decided. You're stuck with me now. Both of you. He glanced at Nneka, seeking permission, and she nodded through the tears she couldn't stop. Is that okay with you? Do you mean it? Chisholm's voice was small, hopeful. Like a real promise. Like a real promise. Daesung placed his hand over his heart, then extended it to Chisholm. In my family in Korea, when we make a promise like this, we seal it with our word and our honor. My word is absolute. My honor is everything. So when I tell you I'm not leaving, I mean I would rather die than break that promise. Understand? Chisholm took his hand, shook it with exaggerated seriousness. I understand. Your family now. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning that went beyond blood. Family. The thing Daesung had lost at 12, had spent 15 years building an empire to replace, had found again in the least likely place imaginable. Yes. His voice cracked. I'm family now. Nneka watched this dangerous man make promises to her son with the same deadly certainty he used to run an empire, and felt something click into place. This was what it meant to be perfectly seen. Not just noticed, not just desired, but understood so completely that someone would kneel on your cramped apartment floor and promise your child forever with the weight of their entire being. There's one condition. Daesung stood, still holding Chisholm's hand, and looked at Nneka with that heavy, searching gaze she'd missed so desperately. We're not staying in this apartment. Not because it's not enough, but because you deserve better. The house with the garden you told me about. Sunlight in the morning. Silence at night. Space for Chisholm to play. That's not a dream anymore, Nneka. That's tomorrow. If you'll accept my hand. He extended his free hand to her. The same hand that had ordered executions and made threats vanish, now offered in partnership instead of protection. A hand that promised violence against anyone who threatened them, yes, but also gentleness, vulnerability, and the terrifying beauty of being chosen. Nneka stood, crossed the small space between them, and placed her hand in his. I accept your hand, your promises, your empire and your vulnerability. All of it. All of me, he corrected softly. The man who kills and the man who kneels. The empire and the emptiness it left. The violence and the desperate need to protect the only real things I've found in 15 years. All of you, she agreed. And as Chisholm laughed and hugged both their legs, as morning light filled her cramped apartment with the promise of the life they'd build together, Nneka realized that invisibility had never been her specialty. It had been her survival mechanism. But now, standing in the space between Daesung's deadly world and her simple dreams, perfectly seen by a man who'd learned to speak the language of hope, she didn't need to survive anymore. She could finally live.